by Michael Criswell. Part 2, The Spiritual Christian Years. Chapter 20, Trusting God in the Wilderness. Quote, "Faith grows during storms. Remember, when you see a person of great spiritual stature, the road you must travel to walk with him is not one where the sun always shines and wildflowers always bloom. Instead, the way is a steep, rocky, and narrow path where the winds of hell will try to knock you off your feet, and where sharp rocks will cut you, prickly thorns will scratch your face, and poisonous snakes will slither and hiss all around you." E. A. Kilbourne. When I first read the autobiographies of John Bunyan and Madame Guyon, properly pronounced Guyon, I was encouraged by the fact that they too had suffered greatly for their faith in Christ. Then there came a second and most unexpected experience. Because I'm a feeler, I became fatigued reading their stories when I realized their suffering never ended, but instead just got worse and worse and worse. 2 Corinthians 4:10 through 12. "We always carry around in our body the death of Jesus, so that the life of Jesus may also be revealed in our body. For we who are alive are always being given over to death for Jesus' sake, so that his life may be revealed in our mortal body. So then, death is at work in us, but life is at work in you." I had never heard of anyone that suffered as many flaming arrows of doubt and accusation from the devil about his salvation as John Bunyan did. Nor had I ever heard of anyone who went to jail twice for a total of 12 years for refusing to stop preaching at his own church directly from the Bible. Also, I had never heard of anyone suffering so much in the cruelest of ways from their own family and their supposed spiritual leaders as Madame Guyon did. To me, they both seemed like they were modern-day Jobs, especially Madame Guyon, who in my opinion suffered quite a bit more than Bunyan did. Reading her story caused me to almost stumble in my own faith a few times. I remember reading and saying, "Oh God, why would you allow her to go through that much suffering?" I kept reading her story, looking for that happy ending of relief, where she finally gets free of her external suffering and afflictions. But it never came. Instead, around every other dark corner was another devil waiting to unleash his ruthless fury on her. I grew increasingly fatigued hearing about the worst mother-in-law I had ever heard of and being filled with outrage at the non-stop evil things she did to her daughter-in-law. However, what kept me going was seeing the amazing amounts of grace God weaved through all her crosses. Just as God promised in his word, he was able to make all grace abound to her, so that she could not only rise above all those afflictions, but also abound continually in every good work. 2 Corinthians 9:8. Those were the parts of her story that kept me going and eventually left me amazed and filled with admiration for her great love and faith in Christ. By the end of her story, I not only hadn't heard of anyone who had suffered as much as her, but I also hadn't heard of anyone who received as much grace to embrace her crosses as she did. I may not agree with all her doctrines, since she came out of Roman Catholicism, But I know that woman loved her God because she obeyed his commands and took up her cross daily for him. John 14:21 through 23, 1 John 5:3. Incidentally, it was encouraging to see that she began separating from some of the Catholic doctrine and traditions as she moved into the deeper spiritual life of loving Christ deeply from her heart. She separated from the Catholic doctrine of salvation by works and instead preached salvation by faith through God's grace. She also was no longer able to participate in vocal prayers, confession, and other sacraments which she had known for so long in Catholicism. Her love and obedience to Christ was pulling her away from the dead religion she had grown up in. And the more she pulled away, the more she was persecuted. She was thrown into prison for teaching people to pray personally and internally to God, rather than the mindless, heartless, repetitive prayers amongst the congregation. In the end, I closed her book, humbled and inspired, praising God for a woman who learned how to walk with God like she did, a woman who not only embraced her heavy cross for Christ, but who also grew to love it. It was hard to read her story and still believe that God does not have favorites, because she was clearly so dear to him. Many people will no doubt want to meet Job when they get to heaven, including me. But I believe we'll have to wait, because he'll likely still be waiting in an even longer line to meet Madame Guillot, the one whom was also called God's princess. There's no doubt that Job had the worst 2 days of suffering that anyone has ever had. But Job's suffering only lasted for a few months, according to Job 7:3, whereas hers lasted her entire lifetime, starting at the age of 4. I share this because I know some will also experience fatigue as they read my dramatic, seemingly never-ending story. After 18 months of writing, I too am fatigued from having to recall, organize, and relive the unbelievable details and evils of my own story, and especially knowing that there is still so much left to tell. However, there is so much more to this story from this point forward than just seemingly senseless suffering. Just like the lives of faithful sufferers for Christ in the last 2,000 years, I have personally seen that willful crucifixion on my cross for Christ has led to the blessed promise of resurrection life in my heart and spirit. You'll get to hear and see astonishing amounts of God's mercy and grace if you keep going on from here in this book. I've been laboring for 18 months, longing for this day to arrive, where I can share with you the most incredible parts of my journey with God. This, the second part of my story, is where both the devil and God become very intentional and active in my life. To maximize the spiritual impact while minimizing the amount of time it takes to read it, after this chapter, I'm going to change my writing style. I'm now going to switch to a more chronologically ordered summary accounting of just the facts as they occurred in real time, much like what you would see in George Mueller's autobiography. From time to time, I may provide some additional commentary to explain certain parts of the story, but otherwise it will be summary excerpts taken directly from my audio journal recordings on the dates they happened. So far in the story, I've had to rely heavily on emails and sporadic journal entries I wrote to tell the story accurately. However, starting in 2011, all the way up to the story of my marriage to Persis in Hyderabad, India, and us coming back to live in the United States on December 25th, 2016, I recorded 2,692 audio recordings detailing all that was happening and what I was learning along the way. I estimate that I recorded hundreds of God's faithful answers to my prayers as they happened, including a few times where I recorded my actual prayers that were later answered exactly as I had prayed. I have dozens of recordings of the Lord telling me of things that were going to happen before they did, so that you too will believe when later you hear how they came true. John 14:29. I have told you now before it happens, so that when it does happen, you will believe. However, and this is a big however, it wasn't just God's incredible guidance, divine providence, and answered prayers that I captured. I also recorded my greatest ignorances, my biggest failures, my most enticing temptations, my most difficult spiritual battles, my darkest sins, my most painful persecutions, and my scariest doubts. What I captured in vivid color, thanks be to God, is authentic Christianity and what it looks like in real life for a Christian to learn to walk hand in hand with his God, being prepared and tested for a ministry. I said at the beginning of the book, and I will confidently say it again here, there is no way that I can overhype what our awesome God has done in the rest of this story. It is 6 years of astonishing grace to the chief of all fools, all captured in real time and written down now for your encouragement in the faith. The way I see it, it would be so fitting for the Lord to take me home after I finish this book, and I wouldn't be surprised at all if He did. That's how much of an exclamation mark on my life and walk with the Lord finishing this story for His glory will feel like. As we are currently building our tiny house on wheels, my mom keeps saying at various stages, "You must be getting so excited." I always reply the same. "No, Mom, not really. It's just a smaller, simpler place to live. If you want to see me excited, you wait until I finish this book. That will be the greatest accomplishment of my life, because it is how I can bring the most glory to my Father." I've already warned Persis to be prepared for that day, because I think I might just be overwhelmed with emotion and fulfillment. The devil has tried multiple times to stop it, tormenting me along the way, not to mention how much I have suffered physically in my neck, shoulders, back, and hands while writing it. Upon its completion, I will feel as though I have finished the work my Father gave me to do in first learning how to walk with Him, and then by telling others a detailed account of all that He did in my life and how He had mercy on me. I feel as though I will be able to echo the words of my Lord after His 3.5 years of ministry on earth. John 17:4. I have brought you glory on earth by completing the work you gave me to do. I still have a long way to go to get to 2018 in this story, so let's get started. And don't worry, I'm not going to share every detail from the 2,600 plus recordings starting in the next chapter. But I am going to share a lot, and I think you will be really blessed as the journey develops. Introduction to Part 2. After overcoming a very ugly childhood, filled with dysfunction, abuse, and constant instability, I began chasing the sense of freedom I felt I had before the age of 9, when my parents divorced. I also went in pursuit of the love and acceptance I desired from others through the making of large amounts of money in sales. Soon, I began trusting in money to make my life happy and to deliver me from every trouble. I was a professing Christian and felt a sincere love for God, but I was terribly deceived not knowing the difference between knowing about God versus knowing Him and walking with Him.